Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Swedish, and Czech. I'd like to point out that you can find the documents on the electronic file, on the e-meeting app, and this is being web streamed. Please note that there are cameramen present here. I'd like to welcome them. Under item 3, I'd like to put the minutes to you for your approval. No comments. Well, if there are no comments, then these are deemed approved, and we move on to item 4 on our agenda. Dear colleagues, dear guests, thank you for joining us today for this public hearing entitled Russia's Hybrid Threats and Attacks in Europe, including best practices to counter them. So, the European Union is a peace project, and of course nobody wants war with Russia, but we have to note that for years now, and in an increasing fashion, Russia is carrying out a shadow war in Europe and using hybrid threats to attack our democracies. These hybrid attacks are taking many different forms. You can see manipulation of information, disinformation, sabotaging critical infrastructure, interference in elections, and acts of violence, and getting involved in migratory flows. I think whatever the strategy, how different it may be, it seems to be trying to achieve the same thing. So they're trying to undermine the faith in the democratic system and undermining support for Ukraine and its war against Russia. This public hearing will be split into 2 panels. We have a first panel, Russia's hybrid threats and attacks in Europe. For this first panel, we have 4 experts who have a lot of experience in the area. I'd like to thank them for being here with us. Here in Brussels, we have Nina Yankovic, who's co-founder and CEO of American Sunlight Project. The American Sunlight Project is trying to make sure that citizens have access to reliable sources of information to inform them in their daily lives. She is an internationally recognized expert when it comes to disinformation and democratization, one of the 100 people deemed to be the most influence, having the most influence in Time magazine when it comes to AI. Christo Grozev is an investigative journalist in Bulgaria. He's worked with Bellingcat and Insider, and he's looking at clandestine Russian operations and the poisoning of Sergei and Julia Skripal, amongst others. And he's won a number of prizes, including European Investigative Journalist Prize, which also makes him a target for the Russian authorities. Also in Brussels, we have with us Omri Price, who's the General Director of Alliance Europe, and Saman Nazari, who is a researcher who works for a not-for-profit organization to promote democracy and pro-European values in civic society. This organization has carried out research into Russian interference in general elections, and they have exposed campaigns of disinformation such as Storm 1516, where deepfake and AI has been used with a view to undermining democratic processes. So we'll start with you, Ms. Yankovic. You have the floor for 7 minutes, more or less.
Thank you. Ms. Loiseau, distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor to address you today. As I do so, a number of forces put our democracies at risk. Powerful technology platforms prioritize keeping users engaged, which more often than not means keeping them enraged, feeding them harmful and hateful content. Their executives, some of the richest men in the world, have aligned and ingratiated themselves with some Western leaders, including the US president, not for the good of representative democracy, but for their personal enrichment. Anti-democratic regimes in Russia, China, Iran, and elsewhere are taking advantage of this environment, launching interference campaigns that aim to undermine the democratic process with little pushback. And homegrown anti-democratic forces have launched a coordinated campaign to undermine researchers, journalists, advocates, and civil servants who work to expose their lies. The confluence of these forces has hobbled some democracies' responses to the strategic threat that we are here to discuss today. Russian hybrid threats. Just last week in the United States, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gleefully announced he was obliterating the office tasked with tracking and responding to foreign information manipulation and interference. Many other US government institutions have been similarly dismantled in the months since President Trump took office, all under the guise of protecting free speech and allegedly, quote, ending censorship. Now, the European Union has become the subject of the Trump administration and tech executives' ire as it dares to implement the legislation that you, its duly elected representatives, drafted, debated, and passed on behalf of your constituents. The United States has now become the largest lobbyist for these multi-billion-dollar corporations and is harassing any nation or body that aims to conduct oversight or require transparency of them. Neither Washington nor the social media platforms it has captured are interested in preserving democracy. They are interested in maintaining their power and hoarding profits. And so, before I describe the details of Russia's recent online influence campaigns, I would like to call upon you to stand firm against another autocracy, the United States of America. The Trump administration is undoubtedly preparing a pressure campaign to force EU institutions to roll back regulation like the DSA, to end support for Ukraine, to stop holding Russia to account. Do not capitulate. Hold the line. Doing so is the clearest signal the European Union could send to Russia and other adversaries that it will not stop fighting to preserve democracy at home and around the world. The Russian Federation, of course, is thrilled to witness division within and between democracies. Moscow continues to actively exploit deepening fissures in our societies in order to amplify discord and polarization. Social media companies have rolled back their efforts to address disinformation on their platforms and restricted access to data, making it difficult to hold them to account. Government and public sector responses to foreign disinformation have been derided and dismantled. Our adversaries have taken note. We are seeing the resurgence of tactics Moscow first used in the early days of its online influence campaigns, such as automated inauthentic accounts, or bot networks, now coupled with emerging technologies like generative artificial intelligence, making them more targeted, more convincing, and more human. Over the past few months, the American Sunlight Project discovered several such Russian networks that both take advantage of decreased tech platform regulation and attention to foreign influence campaigns, and also make use of AI. These networks on X, formerly Twitter, attempted to interfere in the democratic processes of Western democracies, including EU member states. The first network, which we call the Sleeper Agents Network, consists of thousands of anonymous accounts which have repeatedly reposted Russian state propaganda within 60 seconds of it being posted. We call them sleeper agents because in some cases, they've existed undetected on X and Twitter before it for more than a decade. The majority of these sleeper agent accounts were created or became active for the first time during the Internet Research Agency's initial ramp-up before the 2016 US election, in the months before the 2020 election, and in the months following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They primarily post anti-democratic, pro-Trump content. Several of these accounts have even reposted content supportive of the Trump administration's publicly stated goal of annexing sovereign European territory. And despite Elon Musk's avowed goal of ridding his platform of bots, these accounts remain active today, collectively posting over 100 million pieces of content since their inception. The second network, which we call EcoBoost, consists of hundreds of AI-enabled accounts that use fake AI-generated personas to impersonate left-wing activists and support divisive political viewpoints. It was clearly designed by a Russian entity to cause as much political chaos and division as possible in online discourse. EcoBoost posts a confusing mix of pro-Musk, anti-Trump, pro-Green, anti-Labor, anti-democratic content in 5 languages: English, Spanish, German, French, and Arabic. Moreover, the entity that created this network left us with some smoking guns, dozens of posts that contained incorrectly translated Russian characters and words, as well as entire JavaScript code snippets. The network even went offline at a specific time in August 2024 when a mass communications outage was reported in Russia. It's undeniable. Moscow continues to corrupt online discourse in order to undermine free and democratic societies. The Kremlin and its allies are also using emerging technologies, including generative artificial intelligence, to infect our public discourse. American Sunlight recently published a report that detailed how the pro-Russia Pravda network, a set of websites that aggregates and translates pro-Russia propaganda, is using a new technique that we call LLM, large language model, grooming. This technique attempts to infect AI models' chatbot outputs by strategically publishing and duplicating disinformation across the internet. We have confirmed that the Pravda network content has already infiltrated prominent chatbots such as ChatGPT. Our quantitative analysis suggests that the Pravda network is publishing at a rate of at least 3.6 million articles of pro-Russia disinformation and propaganda per year. More than half of the Pravda network, 52 websites, targets geographic or linguistic entities in Europe. It also targets other European entities, such as European heads of state and the EU itself. The Pravda network even publishes content in languages not widely spoken, such as Basque, suggesting that it takes an interest in all corners of Europe and may be attempting to target disaffected ethnic and linguistic minorities, a known Russian influence tactic. The risks presented by the Pravda network and LLM grooming are significant. Other anti-democratic actors could easily replicate the Pravda network's model to target European democracies. As more Europeans turn to AI as a source of news, research, and truth, EU lawmakers must give their populations the tools and education necessary to interact with AI platforms wisely. Similarly, AI companies cannot be allowed to treat all online content as valid for training purposes. If government agencies and civil society organizations identify networks spreading provably false content inimical to European democracy, AI companies should take reasonable steps to purge that data from their data sets and to avoid it in the future. I want to underline as I close that we are a small organization. We have just 3 full-time staff. And yet we have uncovered these concerning campaigns with little to no reaction from the platforms that they have infected. Moreover, these platforms have cut off researchers' access to back-end data to uncover campaigns like these. And as an American organization, no DSA access provision for data exists for us. We would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars per month to access data on X alone. Other platforms like Meta and TikTok offer data libraries that are frankly woefully inadequate. And given this lack of data, our estimates regarding the numbers and reach of the Russian campaigns I've outlined today are likely low. These platforms are not just withholding data, they are not taking action. The American Sunlight Project possesses a fraction of the resources of these multi-billion-dollar technology platforms. They are turning a blind eye to foreign interference, in large part because of the Trump administration's capture of the social media industry. So I will end where I began. If Europe wishes to stand firm against Russia and defend its democracy and sovereignty, it must start by standing up against the bullies in the White House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jankovic. I now give the floor to Christo Grozev. Your investigation work has not only revealed a number of critical information on Russia's operations, but it also made you an immediate target of the Russian state. I would like to give you the floor so that you tell us more about what you exposed. You have the floor for approximately 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to address this committee. I speak based on over a decade of investigating Russian intelligence operations across Europe, at times as an observer and occasionally as a target, as you correctly stated. My purpose is to detail the methods and manifestations of Russia's hybrid warfare, and this goes way beyond espionage to include sabotage, cyberattacks, disinformation, and orchestrated chaos. This assessment relies on direct, verifiable evidence from our own investigations. I will outline approximately 7 domains, 1 per minute, of this multifaceted assault. First, physical sabotage within EU borders. This dimension has escalated dramatically. While Russia targeted European military infrastructure pre-2022, you remember the munition depots, explosions in Czechia and Bulgaria, assassination attempts on Emilian Gebrev in Bulgaria, its cross-border sabotage has significantly increased since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Last year alone, Polish counterintelligence arrested 9 operatives paid by Russian handlers for arson, attempted train derailments, and filming all of this for propaganda purposes. A Belarusian operative set fire to a Warsaw megastore on Russian orders, falsely blaming it on Ukrainians. Finland and Estonia are repairing the Baltic-Connector pipeline, an S-Link 2 cable, deliberately severed by Russian-linked vessels. Historically, it was GRU's Unit 29155, which numbered not more than 100 operatives, that handled many such operations. But now Russia uses thousands of people from former FSB units, organized crime figures, and individuals from occupied Ukrainian territories with a criminal background. A new threat is something we call retail saboteurs. These are recruited people within Europe. The recruitment happens via Telegram chatbots. They're paid $250 to $10,000 or euros for specific tasks. Our investigation has uncovered an FSB operative in France recruiting saboteurs last year for the Olympics for disruption. Second, cyber operations targeting institutions and critical infrastructure in Europe. The cyber attacks have been constant since 2007, but in May of last year, Germany, Czechia, and Poland exposed a multi-year GRU Fancy Bear campaign, infiltrating political parties, defense contractors, and government systems via known vulnerabilities. We have now identified a new offensive cyber capability unit linked to the same sabotage unit, GRU 29155. Previously, they were focused on inciting interstate discord within Europe. But their objectives are now much more sinister. A leaked target list that we got our hands on includes European healthcare providers, medical suppliers, hospital DNA data banks, water systems, and transport hubs. The specific goals and timing are unknown, but the malign intent is very clear. These activities often aim to sow chaos and disrupt essential services, not to gather intelligence. Third, electronic warfare disrupting European skies. Russia also engages in direct electronic warfare. Last spring, and since last spring, over 800 GPS jamming incidents over the Baltic and Nordic regions have forced flight diversions and cancellations. And Estonia, Finland, and Lithuania have lodged protests against this deliberate peacetime harassment. Next, Kremlin-funded political influence and disinformation campaigns, and we heard a lot about that from Ms. Yankovic. Russia actively manipulates our political landscape. The Voice of Europe operation that you remember revealed Kremlin payments to individuals in this very parliament to promote anti-Ukrainian narratives before the June 2024 elections. Intercepted GRU communication that we have boasts of buying or sponsoring European political figures. During Germany's snap elections, over 700 fake accounts amplified AfD points and attacked the CDU candidate. Intense interference occurred in Moldova and Romania, as you remember. While this is not new, remember the Montenegro 2006 coup attempt, the scale is now ubiquitous and very opportunistic. Next,
dear Mr. Grozev, can you just slow down a little bit for our interpreters? They are running after your speech. Thank you.
Thank you, I will. Next, the weaponization of migration. In 2024, European Union saw a 66% spike in irregular crossings from Belarus, orchestrated operation from Russia to funnel asylum seekers to Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, termed instrumentalization by this very commission. Beyond this, our investigation found passports of young Afghan citizens with the mailboxes of GRU Unit 29155 officers. Dozens of these hundreds were traced by us entering Western Europe as asylum seekers, often spending months in Russia before that. The presence of their documents with sabotage experts in Russia strongly suggests potential infiltration with malign intent. Next, energy coercion. Russia wields energy as a weapon. On January 1st, Gazprom halted gas transit altogether via Ukraine. forcing Austria and Slovakia into emergency reserves. Gazprom faces 18 billion in arbitration claims, but they don't care. They can pay that. Next, recruiting Western assets. You may be familiar with the Jan Marsalek case. A fugitive from a highly praised Wirecard company of Germany, the former ex-CEO of that company is now in Russia. He exemplifies the hybrid tactics using European citizens. He helped recruit a Bulgarian-British cell for tasks, including surveillance of a US base, honey-trapping operations against journalists, including myself, and disseminating false flag narratives to discredit Ukraine. UK prosecutors have secured convictions against these people, but Jan Marsalek is walking freely in Russia, far from the reach and apparently from the interest of European legislators and law enforcement. But this highlights Moscow's fusion of human intelligence, cyber and information warfare, as well as outsourcing operations very cheaply. And last, as we heard earlier, the Pravda disinformation ecosystem is an important example of what Russia does. We have been following that from a qualitative, not so much from a quantitative perspective, through a new entity called the Observation Observatory, which is affiliated with the American University in Bulgaria, with the Civic Information and Democracy Center there. And we see there that a study that we just conducted and is available on the website maps out over 190 Kremlin-linked websites and narratives, saturating search engines with pro-Kremlin content, targeting especially vulnerable regions, such as the Balkans, the Baltics, and Moldova. Narratives there aim not to convince, but to confuse and to overwhelm. And last, I would like to mention what we believe the motivations of such campaigns are. What drives this? Often the goal is simply chaos. A leaked intelligence policy paper that we got our hands on states from Russia, confusion is victory. Instilling existential fear, per one document, is key. False bomb threats, planned derailments of trains, fleeting deepfakes, these are tactical victories. Internal dynamics also play a role. Hybrid operations emanating from Russia are now a competitive market. The GRU, the FSB, the SVR, the oligarchs and state companies compete for budgets and favor from Putin via overlapping, sometimes uncoordinated campaigns. This explains duplicated targeting efforts. Hybrid war is both ideology and an industry in Russia. In conclusion, honorable members, Russia's assault is comprehensive, it's psychological, it's technological, economic, and informational. It feels like fear, not war, but that is the point. Exposed cells, mapped networks, and convicted spies show that these operations can be countered. Success stems from collaboration among journalists, between intelligence services in Europe, and critically, between EU member states. A discovered SVR, Russian Foreign Intelligence paper, advises, quote unquote, forget moral principles. We are at war with the West. Quote, close of quote. Europe cannot abandon its principles, but Europe must name this war for what it is, a war. Only then can it be fought with the seriousness and unity required. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are at war with the West. Let's just keep it in mind. And now I give the floor to Mr. Price and Mr. Nazawi together for 10 minutes of intervention.
Thank you very much. It's been really interesting to listen to the previous speakers. Thank you very much to the committee for having us here. As you said, my name is Omri Price. There are some slides that will be illustrating what we have to say. So next slide, please. We are Alliance for Europe. We're a non-profit that's working to defend democracy. And last year we convened the Counter Disinformation Network, which you will hear a little bit more about in a moment. We're also part of the FIMI ISAC, which is convened by the External Action Service and also part of the EU Code of Practice on Disinformation. And if you go to the next slide, the Counter Disinformation Network is essentially, as the name suggests, a network which enables collective action, enables knowledge valorization and sharing, and essentially provides for a platform of expertise exchange. If you go to the next slide, the network so far since we started it about a year ago now includes 51 organizations, about 220 participants. We've covered 4 elections so far and have published about 58 reports and alerts. And if you go to the next slide, I'd just like to reiterate some of the points that we've heard from the chair and from some of the previous speakers. The EU essentially is at war. It's not business as usual, and we need to change the mindset in order to deal with this reality. These operations are not some abstract risk or threat. They are an ongoing active harm. Preparing is good, but the time is now, and we need to be results-driven. Being process-driven and having all kinds of procedures in place or mechanisms in place is all very nice and very good, and I applaud it, but we need to be judged on the results. We need a whole-of-society approach. That is a requirement. It's urgent, and I do commend EU efforts to actively create and build that approach, but it cannot depend on volunteers, on goodwill, on philanthropy. It has to be, ironclad and well-resourced. If you go to the next slide, we'll be going through some of the research that has been conducted, also as part of collaboration with the CDN network and the FIMI-ISAC. To emphasize, this research is based on open source intelligence, or OSINT. It focuses on manipulative behavior, on tactics, techniques, and procedures that are out there in the space. It is content agnostic. It is not dependent on the truthfulness of any statement or any views as such. We'll be looking at tactics like AI deepfakes, like bot networks, and affiliations with authoritarian states. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague here, Sam, our lead researcher, who will take you through some of the findings.
Thank you, Omri. Next slide, please. So, ahead of the German elections, a consortium of FIMI-ISAC members, led by ISD, so the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and Alliance for Europe, convened a coalition of fact-checkers, open source intelligence researchers, academics, and media, or journalists, working together to monitor and counter information threats and hybrid threats towards the German elections. We identified primarily 5 big foreign operations that we could verify belong to, primarily the Russians. The first one is called Storm 1516, an operation initially seen during the US elections that then now moved their focus to the German elections. It's we believe it's run by an organization called the Foundation to Battle Injustice, which is a fabricated NGO in Russia, founded by Prigozhin, so the former head of Wagner, and is believed to be the continuation of the Internet Research Agency, the organization who engaged or tried to manipulate the US elections in 2016. I will go into more detail on this operation because it's the most fascinating and complex of the bunch. The double-ganger influence operation is quite well known. It's an operation that tries to mimic both authentic Western media, but also citizens, and try to basically create artifacts, either articles or social media posts that try to make it seem like a Western media, for example, like the Deutsche Welle, for example, is promoting Russian narratives, or trying to make it look like German citizens in this case are aligning, are agreeing with Russia, or trying to create division in society. Operation Overload, on the other hand, is targeting us researchers, they're targeting journalists, they're targeting media, fact-checkers, and so on, and trying to get them to waste their time. They're creating fabricated cases that they're trying to get people to write about, and just by doing so, overwhelm them so they can't see the real cases. We have the Russia Today, which is a sanctioned media who has a branch in Germany. They're sanctioned and therefore not accessible in the EU. Therefore, during the election period, we saw several attempts to try to circumvent these sanctions, including creating a new account on X. Colleagues at ISD and the German Marshall Fund, for example, who also did the Operation Overload research with us, also could show that they have been using podcasting platforms to launder the content into European audiences. Lastly, one of the very interesting activities that we saw was an offline operation where they had operatives on the ground sabotage cars and then blame it on climate activists. You can see some of the contributors to this project in the slide here. Next slide, please. So moving on to Storm 1516, run by our FBI, we were alerted by journalists from Corrective about the existence of this operation. And then, as you can see here on the image, here's an example of one of the websites that they created. So this is basically a conscription website informing the German public that Germany will be conscripting 500,000 new troops. It's obviously fabricated, it's obviously created, but they had phone numbers, they had chat lines, and so on. So this is one of the types of websites that this operation created. Another type is just fabricated news websites. They don't try to mimic any known websites, but they try to create websites that they then basically take articles from RT, they take articles from German press, they rewrite them using AI, and then just populate these websites with this content. In between this AI-generated content, you see they actually write, not real articles, but they write proper articles. Within these articles, they add AI-generated videos, so deepfake videos. They add acted-out videos where you have actors just reading a script, and you can see them read a script, or unfabricated documents. Next slide, please. A trigger warning, by the way, this contains a corpse, AI-generated corpse. Here's two examples. The first one that you can see here is basically a real missing German girl. She's actually missing. And then they created an AI-generated video claiming that this Muslim man has basically killed this girl. And another one is of someone discrediting German politicians. In general, this content, these articles, these videos, try to discredit German politicians. And they've been discrediting basically all the major German political parties except AfD. We also seen how they try to divide German society using these types of narratives tied to, this missing girl, for example, being murdered by a Muslim. They then use influencers to get this content onto social media. Next slide, please. We could see that this actually managed to penetrate into German society. We had 2 AfD politicians actually write about narratives and content that was promoted by this operation. We saw that 33 million views were achieved by this operation that we could see. And we alerted the European Code of Practice on disinformation about this, alerting the platforms through that, and provided evidence to the European Commission's DSA enforcement team. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sam. So to wrap up briefly, just a few thoughts to close with. It is clear that these operations are sophisticated and elaborate, and they are dealing with and building up essentially ecosystems. As you also heard from the previous speakers, we're not just dealing with this or that network, but we're dealing with a whole galaxy of different methods, different approaches, influencers, and the media ecosystem, essentially. To deal with that, it's absolutely crucial that we have enforcement of the Digital Services Act that is ambitious and is timely and robust. It's also crucial that that lines up with enforcement of sanctions and all the different tools that are at play be coordinated properly. And then we have initiatives that are coming up, the Democracy Shield, the namesake of this committee, the Resilience Councils, which is an initiative by the Polish presidency, and the EU Preparedness Plan. All of these need to be meshed together and work together hand in hand in order to create an ecosystem of defense, a whole of society defense. To do that, we also need resources. Therefore, we would strongly advocate for a Democracy Shield fund that would come along with the initiative in order to give proper, robust resourcing to the initiative. Then we have essentially a need for a whole of society approach to actually be tangible and be brought into reality. And with that, I'll close and hand back to you. Thank you.
Next slide.
Thank you very much to our guest speakers. Now is the time for a Q&A for this panel. I will start by our coordinators, 2 minutes each, and I'll start with EPP and Thomas Deszowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear colleagues. Thank you, all speakers, for very interesting information. Russia's hybrid threats include spreading lies and propaganda online to divide our society and weaken our democracies. Platforms like Meta and Telegram often used by Russia to do this. Fake accounts, fake information, and organized disinformation campaign are spreading too easily, and this platform are not doing nothing. This is why I, with other EU DS members of European Parliament, sent a letter to Executive Vice President Henna Virkkunen. We want Meta to enforce their own rules to make sure people use these real names, don't create fake and multiply accounts, and that the source of information is clear and transparent. We want the Commission to put pressure on them to meet European standards and to sanction them when they break their own rules. This is simple rules, but if platforms don't follow them, they help Russia spreading disinformation and influence public opinion in the EU. Russia is also using psychological operation to attack us. They repeat the same lies against and against until people believe them. They use fake news, memes, emotional videos, and even deep fakes. These methods change how people think about the feeling. This is not just about social media. This is battle about the truth. And if you don't act, people will lose trust in information, in media, in democracy itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For the SND's Christel Schaldemose.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also a big thanks to our speakers here today. Well, I mean, you don't really become happy when you hear what you're saying here today. It is truly a difficult task we have in front of us. I mean, I wrote some questions down, but bottom line is that I want to know if you think that the tools we have in the toolbox today, are they sufficient? I mean, is it enough? I mean, honestly, DSA is good. I think so. I negotiated myself, but is it enough? Do we have what more? Do you need funds? Do we need stronger regulation? You know, it's so difficult to go up against this. So my question is primarily to all of you: is it enough? And if it is not really enough, a truly and a good enforcement of our rules today, then what is then needed, and is it possible to fight this at all? I think that's primarily my question. Thanks.
For the Patriots, Antonio Tanger Correa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you very much for informing us that we are at war with Russia, because I will duly inform my Prime Minister and my Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Defense, because of course they are not aware of that. But I will inform them. Secondly is, yes, Russia does disinformation. Yes, Russia is active on the social networks, and yes, Russia is undermining a lot of things. But what about ourselves? What about the European Commission, who gave 1.5 billion to NGOs between 2014 and 2021 without accounting? What went that money for? What about the Tinderman scandal? What about the Soros Foundation and the Soros Open Society's money is going where? In the European countries, of course. Within the European societies, of course. To do what? It's not only the Russians who are doing some disinformation within European democracies. We are, they are, and a lot of funded institutions like the USAID proved that. And also, of course, the Commission, the European Commission, of course, because to divide, to conquer is as old as the humanity and as old as human being, and we know that. So why don't we look into all of these phenomena instead of only regarding Russia? That's my main question, and that's what I would like to be responded to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to Mariusz Kamiński for ECR, I would just remind my colleagues that today is a hearing about Russia. So, Mr. Kamiński.
Pani Przewodnicząca, na początek.
Pluralism when it comes to our experts. These topics should be discussed by non-partisan experts. We presented some proposals, names of renowned experts from Poland, and I think that the Polish point of view, the Polish experience is very important. Our country has been brutally attacked by Russia for many years, regardless of which government was in place. Our government was attacked a lot of times, and we wanted to share this experience, but our experts have not been invited. And the effect is that we have here needs to be done about the White House. We have had many brutal attacks. Various groups which were active on the territory of Poland were disinforming, sabotaging. In 2023, during the parliamentary election campaign, my government was attacked by Russian spies. There were slogans, anti-governmental slogans painted on walls in cities, and these people were paid by Russia. It has been verified and confirmed by the law enforcement agencies, but nobody has been punished. There was journalist Pablo González, who is a citizen of Spain and Russia. He was apprehended in Poland for espionage. He was involved in very dangerous operations. He was spreading disinformation, and he was defended by the European Commission. The European Commission. So once again, I'm very disappointed. I think we should have a more pluralist panel of experts, and the Polish experience should be taken into account. We have some very precious experience, so if this committee is to be credible, we have to keep up a certain standard.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kamiński. Before giving the floor to our Renew colleague, I would just remind everyone how these hearings are organized. I don't pick up the guest speakers. They are picked up by coordinators of the different political groups, and there has to be a majority of groups agreeing for each and every single guest speaker. So I'm sorry that your suggestion didn't get a majority, but this was the choice made by a majority of political groups in this special committee. That's how public hearings are organized. Now the floor goes to Helmut Brandstätter for Renew Europe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, all of you. And first, I have a lot of questions. My first question is to Mr. Grozev, but I also want to express my regrets. I'm from Austria, that you could not stay in Vienna because the authorities couldn't give you enough safety. I want to start with that, but that's also my question. As we know, there was an organization of Bulgarian spies in Vienna that followed you. and tried probably also to kill you. What can you tell us about these organizations? Is there still a network working in Austria? And is there a role of the Russian embassy? Because we know there are a lot of members, so-called diplomats in Vienna, and some of them are spies. We know that. The authorities don't do any against them. And so that's my first question. Then you said Masalek is in Russia. You are sure about that? Is he really there? Then I have a few other questions. Someone of you talked about the infiltration of European parties. Can you tell us more about this, also about money flows to European parties? Then you talked about sleeper agents who are also active in the social media. Are there still sleeper actives? What is next? What do we have to expect will be next? You talked about migrants coming over Belarus. We also know that there are migrants coming over Africa, and the journalist Philip Obadji Jr., he was working for Daily Beast and others, he always explains us how it is organized by the so-called Wagner Group, that more and more African refugees also come to Europe. Can you tell us more about that? Then there was the question of the Americans and about what's happening in the USA right now. As I know from certain so-called journalists in America, Tucker Carlson is only one of them, they are also only bringing us the Russian propaganda. Do you know anything about the cooperation between American and Russian organizations? And my last question is, of course, the guy from Portugal is not here anymore. Of course, there is war, and your government does know it's a hybrid war. And I have two questions about the hybrid war. The first is, what is next, and what can you tell us? How can we help us against the hybrid war? And do you have any ideas how the free countries, how Europe can inform the Russians what's happening here and what's happening in their country? Thank you.
Thank you. For the Greens, Kim von Sparentak.
Thank you very much, and also thank you so much to all the great speakers for giving their overview of all the trends we're seeing in this regard. I had a lot of questions, but actually hearing all your expertise, it comes down to one now, because it sounds like a democracy shield is more necessary than ever. And of course, a shield is made up out of different layers. So my question is, if it was up to you, which 2 or 3 elements would be part of the layers that we put in place in our society to make sure that we protect our democracies? Thank you.
Thank you. There's no colleague from the left, so for ESN, I give the floor to Christine Anderson.
Thank you very much. So we've been warned about Russian disinformation and the way it exploits societal division, and I absolutely do not dispute this threat. However, we also have to see the EU has increasingly moved towards policies that dangerously blur the lines between foreign interference and domestic dissent. And having listened to your contributions, I'm really gasping for words, and I would like to summarize all of your contributions as follows. You see the speck in your brother's eye, but you fail to see the egregious log in your very own. We've seen content moderation contracts outsourced to private companies with no democratic oversight. We've seen algorithms not only downgrade certain viewpoints, but deleted accounts over raising very legitimate points simply because they did not align with so-called official truth. One example was a discussion about the origin of COVID. All the information about that, whether it was a lab leak or it was zoonotic origin, have been cancelled, and it was not to be spoken about. We now know it was a lab leak, but back then it was disinformation, which you would have had deleted from all the networks, correct? So my question is this, and I might add, that's just the point. The truth does not mind being questioned. It's actually the lie that does not like being challenged, as Nietzsche once pointed out. My question is this: is the drive to combat disinformation, and how do we ensure that governments, especially supernatural ones like the EU, do not use this fight as a pretext to suppress politically inconvenient speech, that do not suppress speech simply because it contradicts the officially promoted narrative? And how do we protect our societies from malignant influence, without sliding into digital authoritarianism under this EU flag? Thank you.
Thank you. We have our city chair present with us, Maria-Agnes Strack-Stimmermann. You want to take the floor?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Ich spreche Deutsch.
I'll speak German. First of all, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for taking the initiative. I think it's important to be made aware of what's going on online from experts. We have a feeling about this, but I think you can just put your hands up to your face. I think it's up to us and our countries and to make our citizens aware of what is happening. You just can't believe it. I have a few questions. I don't know who will answer. That's up to you. First of all, there are reaction mechanisms in Europe, and there have been sanctions put on Russian actors, but that's only of limited help. It's still going on. So what do you recommend to get a handle on this? And the second question, this is a technical question. If you can do something, technically speaking, to deal with these bots, if the users don't notice, perhaps technically that can be prevented? My third question, if I understood you correctly, you said that before the elections in Germany, certain parties were attacked. The AfD, for example, was not attacked. Is that conclusion that the radical parties that are close to Russia are involved and therefore are protected in these actions against democratic parties? Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor back to our guest speakers to answer this first round of questions. Listening to our guest speakers answering, you may register for the Catch the Eye if you have not already done so for a 1-minute question. So the floor is back to you, Mrs. Jankovic first.
Thank you. I'll start with a couple of the interventions that I think are worth investing in because several of the questions touched on that. My work throughout Europe, and just because I focused a little bit on my own country, given the threats that we face, and also on the EU today, doesn't mean that I don't have expertise in countries like Poland. I am indeed Polish, Polish American, and I'm very aware of the attacks that Russia has perpetrated on Poland for hundreds of years. And have a whole chapter in my book dedicated to it. But what I've learned in interviewing both government officials and civil society members across the European Union is that there are many important things to invest in. Journalism, continuing to invest in good quality journalism, investigative journalism is incredibly important. Information literacy is incredibly important and takes generations to build. And unfortunately, what we have right now is a situation where the information environment is changing very quickly. People are fed information and disinformation and don't really know how to consider it. They're not deliberately making choices about the information they consume. So empowering civil society organizations, locally based civil society organizations, to work with people, especially voting age people, not just students, to understand how to navigate the information environment is really important. We also had a couple of questions, are the tools enough? Are they sufficient? What can we do to make sure that while combating disinformation, we are not suppressing speech? I actually think, and the proof is in the pudding, we'll see what happens with the implementation of the DSA, but I do think that the DSA provides a lot of the transparency and oversight mechanisms necessary to ensure that platforms are making decisions that are both comporting with the law and giving people a right to appeal and making sure that their content isn't being removed summarily without any due process, to Ms. Anderson's point. There was a question about the sleeper agents bot network that I mentioned. This network is absolutely still active and still posting because we have folks like Elon Musk who don't believe that foreign interference is a threat anymore. Lately, it has been posting about the Canadian elections, which are coming up next month, but we've also seen some posts targeting Poland, given its elections coming up. We also had a question about how to inform Russian citizens. I think, again, investment in investigative journalism, we saw the power of Alexei Navalny, the way that he was able to really, create support for a broader anti-Putin movement in Russia through his investigations and his organization's investigations. That was extremely powerful. And I think there's room to fill that gap that unfortunately after Alexei Navalny's murder has been created. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grozev, if you're still online, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will try to address some of the questions that I was able to take down on paper. To the honorable gentleman from Austria about the 6 spies that were arrested after their operation, mostly based in Austria but around Europe. As you know, they're convicted. The sentencing is expected in less than a month, but they will definitely get long sentences and will act as discouragement for at least some of the potential new hires, new recruits in this freelance espionage proxy game. And they're definitely, that's definitely setting an example. And again, the more of such freelancers are arrested, the more it will disincentivize people, even people like Jan Marsalek and others, to offer their services just because the cost of offering services will be much higher. In terms of the embassy support for such operations, of course, Russian residentura in embassies has been one of the core sort of bulwarks of Russian hybrid operations. Their ability to depend on such support through the military attachés, who are technically and unofficially always affiliated with the GRU military intelligence, or the second culture secretaries who are either FSB or SVR, that dependence has become really weak just because of the number of expelled dual spies/diplomats from European countries, and in this particular case, Bulgaria unexpectedly maybe leads the way with expulsion of almost 70 Russian so-called diplomats in the last 3 years. And this is one reason why Russia has had to pivot to the use of freelancers and to the use of people with lesser experience in professional sabotage, which increases the cost of collateral damage, but also makes it much more chaotic, and it helps Russia achieve the chaos. In terms of political parties that are sort of assisted by Russia, you have to understand that Russia has absolutely no ideological allegiance, either to the far right or to the far left. They just happen to believe that these are the easier parties that they can infiltrate and acquire their allegiance for a lower cost. But their main goal is really to get through and infiltrate the mainstream parties, the parties in the middle. And unfortunately, I am not at liberty to mention which party, which was not a pro-Russian party, the GRU boast to have infiltrated, just because these are their words, their allegations, and we still have not been able to prove that with independent verification. But they were boasting in a recently leaked correspondence to have infiltrated in the European Parliament one of the parties that is not known to have pro-Russian stance. And that, of course, would be much more dangerous in a way. And last, I will just share some of my beliefs in what can serve as methods of improving our fighting back against the information and other hybrid wars. First, I would say that I think naming and shaming, a doctrine of naming and shaming, and fast-track declassification of such operations so that attribution of sabotage or of cyber attacks is made public within a short period of time, because otherwise the public forgets and cannot make the connection when you tell them 6 months later, oh, that thing that happened in your shopping mall was actually a Russian operation. There should be a fast tracking of these operations, and there should be a mandatory disclosure, because many countries, unfortunately, have chosen to hide such operations from the public in order to not cause panic. And an election firewall is something that I would strongly recommend, forcing large platforms, probably under the DSA legislation framework, to provide real-time API access to researchers and journalists during pre-election periods, closing the week-long window Marsalek-style bots that were exploded. And obviously, a question is that I would strongly ask to everybody, and this comes back to one of the questions from the honorable gentleman from Austria. Again, capture people, make everything possible to arrest people like Jan Marsalek, because this will make it much less attractive for others to be copycats of this lucrative proposition that he has actually had in his hands.
Thank you. And now Mr. Price and Mr. Nazawi.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those enlightening questions we had. I'll pick up those that I can address in the time that we have. Of course, we are non-partisan, so essentially we've reported our research. We support democracy at large, and we don't want to insinuate any kinds of connections that we don't necessarily have evidence for, but essentially the facts speak for themselves in a way. We are freedom of speech defenders. So, I mean, to quote a phrase, the aim of this part of the war is to flood the zone with shit, to excuse my language. But, you know, it's very, very difficult to have freedom of speech or to say anything properly if you're choking on, excuse the image, shit. So what we need is to have an information space that enables democracy and enables all the most controversial things to be said, but said openly and transparently. Without manipulation. That's why we focus on tactics and not on content. What we need in terms of the tools that we have, and are the tools enough, we need the tools to be used decisively, ambitiously, and in a timely manner. We know that we have colleagues in the institutions that are working for robust DSA implementation. We need it to be done in a timely fashion. We need clear red lines to be laid out in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. If you manufacture a toaster and you say, well, I've sold you this toaster, it might burn your kitchen down, I don't know, it's too hard for me to go find out, you would not allow that toaster on the market. The same should be the case here. This is safety that should have a space in the market. Then, I mean, we need to build ecosystems. We need to look at, you know, what has been done by the adversaries of democracy, and we can take a leaf out of their book. We need to invest in having communities that can operate over time with a strong backbone. One of the things that has been flagged as a major problem for European civil society is core funding to just keep organizations running. Finding ways to create a backbone and to collectively fund the requirements that are needed to run organizations, for example, is one of those easy, relatively low-hanging fruits of things that could be done. Then we need to connect between tackling the tactics that are being used, so, you know, that coordinated enforcement that I talked about earlier, about making sure that sanctions are enforced together with the DSA, but then combining that with active strategic communications campaigns, making sure that we're actually reaching audiences in the EU that do not otherwise get information. A lot of people just get their information from social media platforms and distorting algorithms. We need to make sure that all parts of society have access to meaningful information. And we need a mindset shift to not draw out these plans for years and years, but to do this now. Then, to close, we need to invest in real plurality so that these platforms are not, you know, a fake public square that is actually owned by some guy, but to have an ecosystem that actually has several competing platforms where you could go to choose what you want to find, and to have real meaningful freedom of speech across platforms instead of being dominated by one rich guy, essentially. And for that, we need European tech autonomy, we need European tech investment, and that's why connecting between all of these different initiatives that are being launched is so important. And I'll pass it on to Sam.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to try to be short, but in the core of this, I think one of the things that we're currently not doing well is working together. We're all working in silos. Journalists working with journalists, fact checkers working with fact checkers. with the Counter-Disinformation Network, we're trying to bring together all the different stakeholders, the fact-checkers, journalists, open-source intelligence researchers, the academics, the communicators, and other practitioners. And I believe that only by doing this, by actually working across society with everyone involved, we can actually manage to defeat this issue. And we need funding that allows for this and that encourages this. Furthermore, I think to raise the point of Poland, we're actually now working on the Polish elections. We're working with around 20 organizations in Poland monitoring those elections. It's a key issue, and we have a lot of Polish experts that are very active on this topic. I think, yeah, indeed. I think one of the key things here is if we focus on the behaviors, if we focus on how these influence operations are being done, we can actually stop how they work. When it comes to, for example, someone was asking about if we can technologically stop these bot networks from working. Yes, we can. We're tracking these bot networks using the behavior, the pattern of posting, the profile characteristics, and by doing so, we can automatically collect everything they're posting with very, very available commercial tools. Well, they're quite expensive commercial tools, as mentioned, barely affordable to us, but we can do it. If we can do that as a tiny NGO, the platforms can easily do it. And we have a clear example of this. Blue Sky was, during the German elections, attacked by the double-ganger influence operation. They started flooding Blue Sky with content from this operation. We mapped out how they were working, the tactics and techniques they were employing. We provided this evidence and the information we had to Blue Sky, and now this operation no longer is able to operate on their platform. If Blue Sky, which we know is a one-person team working on trust and safety, and they have like 25 content moderators in place, a startup without any profits can do this, the bigger social media platforms can do it as well. So yeah, everything is possible as long as we work together, have proper funding, and get the tech platforms to do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have a second round of questions. It's going to be a catch the eye, so it's merciless. It's 1 minute per speaker. I'll start with EPP, Milan Zver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank all the speakers for their very interesting presentations. In Europe is growing threat from Russian hybrid operations. In the past 2 years, we have seen a sharp rise of cyber intrusions, attacks on critical infrastructure, sabotage, and disinformation campaign, etc., etc. Yes, the European Union has responded with sanctions, deeper cooperation with NATO, but this is not enough. Europe must send a clear and strong message. European democracy can only be strong if it is also protected, but not only by soft power. Let me add something. An important field of disinformation is the issue of history and its use or misuse in propaganda. On the 9th of May, Moscow will organize events at the occasion of 80th anniversary of the end of the World War II. As we know, behind the Iron Curtain, one totalitarianism was replaced by another. Is EU, but this is the questions for all, prepared to stand for historical truth or historical facts and fight against Russian propaganda in this case?
Thank you. For S&D's Evelyn Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also want to thank the speakers and all the interventions that they have made until now. As being said, Russia has been tremendously spreading disinformation and misinformation and sometimes also even being successful from their own point of view. Most probably Brexit is for one example, but also the cooperation they have with the far right in this parliament even. Not to also forget to mention the far right politicians and political parties on national level. In Sweden, we have a far-right party called Sweden Democrats, a part of the ECR here. During the last elections, the EU election last year, it was revealed that they had so-called secret troll farms. These anonymous troll accounts, which belong to the political parties, were found to have actively spread Russian narratives and disinformation. So my question is, have there been any similar cases around the European Union where political parties on national levels have had troll farms, also anonymous troll accounts, and actively spread this kind of narrative to, of course, unfortunately, from their point of view, try to affect the outcome of the elections? Thank you.
For the Patriots, Csaba Dömötör.
Let me speak in Hungarian. Fontos dolog.
I find it very important that this committee focuses on external actions and influence, but it's also very important to supplement this with other actions apart from Russia. So, for example, if political action is carried out with blurred finances, then this needs to be transparent. And NGOs speaking here need to shed light on their finances. And the same is true for Commission. And then if fact checkers were censors in the USA, then in Europe this system needs to be dismantled. And then if political actors are financed with millions of dollars, then this needs to be mentioned, because these people were financed by the same fashion as those speakers here today. So what we what we do not accept from Russia, we must not accept here. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to the experts. Just a brief question to Messrs. Price and Nassari. Most recent contribution, you said that there was fake news spread about a missing woman that reached 23 million people. Could you tell me how you get that figure? What techniques you use to acquire that information? Then I'd like to know, do you know that the most viewed contribution of Russia Today in Germany reached 1.3 million? This wasn't disinformation. This was a video contribution that had discovered lies by the government. It was about a demonstration in Chemnitz where the government had said there were witch hunts there, and the head of the German intelligence agency and services said that this hadn't happened, there was no incitement. And I mean, that was the truth, and they just showed reality, basically. So I'd like to ask you if that's proportionate. If we start pointing the finger, we're not making a mistake if we close a channel like this, because we're putting sanctions in place. And obviously they can multiply those and replicate them. And you said that you wanted more money. Could you tell us what sort of sums of money you're talking about? What sort of money should the EU give you? In Germany, the public broadcasters have 9 billion euros to spread the truth.
Go back to our guest speakers. I will start with Mr. Grozev, because I know he has a plane to catch and he has to go to the airport. So, Mr. Grozev. So he left already. He really had a plane to take. So the floor goes to Mr. Price and Nassari, and I will end with Mrs. Yankovic.
Thank you very much again, and for that second round of questions. Indeed, I think that these points on the investment that needs to be made, yes, we're talking about billions. I think it needs to be equivalent to the ambition that exists. And when it comes to sanctions, I think that this is something that is decided at member state level. The Council takes a decision. Russia has started a war of aggression against Ukraine. that is a very, very serious violation of the international order, and therefore, the response is proportionate. We're not second-guessing that decision, but we do need these things to be enforced because, as we're discussing in this hearing, this is a hybrid war. When it comes to whether or not other means of interference have been used, I mean there were several questions there about whether troll farms have been used and others. Yes, there have been a variety of examples. I'll let Sam maybe answer to the technical elements of this. I think we need to basically have a high level of ambition when we try and create a level playing field, especially for elections, making sure that these are not undermined by any party. I mean, this is something that really does not have any bearing on the political spectrum. This should be a level playing field across the board. And then, when it comes to transparency, of course, we would support the same kind of transparency that happens. The transparency register, the European Union institutions has been a very, very important contribution. It has to be and has to remain essentially a mandatory thing. And the steps that have been taken to make it more pervasive has been very welcome. So I think with that, I'll just say I very much appreciate the role that this committee has been playing, and I really very much support your journey, essentially, in making the Democracy Shield a tangible and forceful way of defending European democracy. And with that, I'll pass on to Sam.
Thank you. To answer your question about the views, that was across the operation, not that one video. It was in total, I remember from the top of my mind, 13 different articles, videos, fabricated observables, as we call them. And the way we measured them, 13, I remember. I could be one more, one less. And this, how we measure it, we were basically looking visually in the view metrics on Twitter, for example, on X. We're looking wherever we can find the metric, we collect that. So it might be more. And we can only go with the data that we can see. That's what the platforms are telling us. And see, sums of money, it has to be proportionate. The Russians are, like the RT and Sputnik and so on, they're not legitimate media entities. They are, tools of foreign influence. They weren't created to inform the Russian public. They don't have this. It's not the domestic media that went global. It was always made for this purpose. So it's not, it's a weapon, and we need to face it as such. We're all for freedom of speech, all for freedom of press. This is not a press, this is not a media entity. Sums of money, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. Yankovic.
Thank you. My colleagues answered many of the questions very ably. One thing I'd like to add about Russia and its use of Russia today in particular is that the reason that Russian disinformation is so difficult to combat and gets us all tied into knots about issues related to freedom of expression is because it mixes truth with fiction. So there may be incidents where Russia is reporting the truth. In fact, Russia today got its start in the United States reporting on the Occupy Wall Street protests very ably. That's how it built its audience up, right? But then it will have something that is genocide denial or denying the war in Ukraine or saying the moon is made out of cheese, right? This is how Russia works, mixing truth and fiction. So it may have had an article that was reported, and I'm not saying that I know that article. I don't know. I take it there was some disagreement between you and your colleague, but it may have had an article that was very journalistically based, while it also had articles that were reporting deep fakes as fact. So that's just the first thing. The second thing that I think is really important for this committee to consider as you think about interventions that you might take in the future, particularly because we have this idea being exported from my own country, that any type of fact-checking, any type of counter-disinformation work is tantamount to censorship. This is the result of a political pressure campaign that has been going on in the States for some years. Mark Zuckerberg famously now has retracted his funding for fact-checking in the United States and said that it was tantamount to censorship. He did this because of the threat of regulation in the United States, as well as the threat of a lawsuit from President Trump. Fact-checking is speech. Period. It is one of the ways that organizations, civil society organizations, individuals can express their free expression, right? They can use that right to free speech. Where were these fact checkers financed? To the member from Hungary's question, they were financed by Facebook, primarily. They were financed by those folks. This idea that there is no transparency around this, my colleague very ably answered the question about transparency here today. There's transparency around your grants. There are ways that, the DSA provides for oversight and transparency of the platforms. Again, I think you have the tools necessary to protect freedom of speech while also making sure that you are exposing, as Mr. Grozev said, the meddling from countries like Russia, as well as, domestic campaigns that we've heard referred to by the member from Sweden as well. There are many ways that Russia uses division in our societies in order to push us further apart. And when we see folks who are engaging in these sorts of divisive narratives, Russia is all too happy to amplify them. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
So thank you very much to our guest speakers. It ends our first panel, but before we end it, I would like to give the floor to our Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Sandra Cagnete.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank each of the speakers, both for their excellent, highly informative contribution today and for work, what you are doing day-to-day basis. And I would like to return back to the previous mandate when European Parliament established special committee on countering foreign interference in the democratic processes. And I really regret that the recommendations of produced two extensive reports are far from being implemented. We are having the same narrative and experts' opinions again and again. We all know that in the past few years there has been noticeable increase in the range and intensity of Russia's hybrid attacks on EU territory. And there are no signs that they will decrease. And I would say that there is nothing hybrid or soft about these attacks. They are real, kinetic attacks, acts of sabotage, and we should call them as they are, that Russia is waging state-sponsored terrorism against EU member states and our societies. And I'm really glad that there is a growing understanding across the EU and all EU member states that we must invest more and act faster when it comes to security and defense. But still, we are not seeing a similar level of ambition and commitment when it comes to addressing the vulnerabilities against hybrid threats, and particularly the lack of financial resources. And I agree with Christo Grozev that this is really absurd that several member states continue to allow more and more Russian so-called diplomats to be stationed in their countries. We know that these cover intelligence officers are exploiting our freedoms, the Schengen freedom of movement to conduct operations, transfer money, weapons, and smuggle criminals, all across Europe. This is completely unacceptable, and all member states should take this threat seriously because Russia is adapting and looking for new ways of obtaining intelligence, which is critical to executing the hybrid attacks across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Sandra. What we heard from our distinguished guest speakers is key. Indeed, it's not threats, it's not hypotheses, it's a war that is waged against us by Russia, a hybrid war, but still a war. Not driven by ideology, but driven by opportunism in order to trigger orchestrated chaos. These are words that I heard from you, and I think they are really relevant. We must focus on tactics, not content. There's no Ministry of Truth in the European Union, but there is no naivety towards manipulation and interferences. You gave us a few clues about what we have to do, enforcement of DSA, as you all say. Each and every guest speaker that comes to this committee insists on the enforcement of DSA, whole of society approach, European tech autonomy, no work in silos. Thank you for these tips. It ends our first panel, and then we will start in 2 minutes just to give you time to breathe with the second panel. But thank you again to our guest speakers. Colleagues, I'll switch again to my mother tongue. Et vous demander de mettre vos écouteurs.
I'd like to ask you to put your headphones on, please, because we'll be starting the second panel. We're going to talk to the responses that Europe has been giving to Russian hybrid attacks. We will now hear from our guests on the best practices that they have seen or potentially implemented, or the ones that they recommend to us, strengthening the resistance of our societies in terms against manipulation of information and against hybrid attacks to maintain the integrity of democracy in the Europe. Peter Pomerantsev is joining us. He's a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University in the ARENA program, who is a co-director of that ARENA program that is fighting misinformation and polarization, favoring a resilient approach with innovative research and collaboration with journalists, academics, and NGOs. Now, from Stockholm, we have Dr. Magnus Hjort, and the chairwoman apologizes for any mispronunciation of the name. He's the Director General of the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, so the methods that Swedish is using to fight foreign interference and information manipulation. This was established in 2022 and is a model. It has some 70 years of experience in psychological defense and total defense for Sweden. Then we have Tafio Pisalo, and again, the chairwoman hopes that she pronounced the name correctly, joining us from Finland, in charge of the European Center for Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, which is the common objective of the center, and strengthening the defense of the participating states with information and assistance in fighting hybrid attacks and strengthening EU, NATO cooperation in the subject. I'd like to give the floor straight away to Mr. Pomerantsev for 7 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, can you hear and see me okay?
Loud and clear. Very loud and very clear.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for this tremendous opportunity. The essence of the question that I want to answer today is, how can a democracy or democracies defend themselves from an attacker who does not respect any democratic rules? When your assailant uses corruption, blackmail, economic war, cyber attacks on hospitals, assassinations, arson, illegally funded covert campaigns, do you need to sacrifice your democratic values to compete? Or is there a democratic response to what we today have been calling Russia's hybrid war? I believe there is a democratic response, and I'm going to look at three types of of positive lessons that we can draw on as we formulate our thinking on this. So the first place that I want to draw on is actually our adversary. I think we need to learn something from what we've been calling Russia's hybrid toolkit today. This mix of information operations, propaganda, arson, economic blackmail, corruption, assassinations, vote buying, and so on. So much more than disinformation, which is only a tiny element in Russia's toolkit. I'm not saying, of course, that we should imitate these tactics. My argument is the opposite. But we do need to understand the key insight that Russia has, that is basically that we live in a networked world, in a multi-stakeholder world, where the greatest advantage lies in leveraging different institutions and different tools for a greater aim. So when Russia wants to undermine European defense production, it'll use a mix of tools. Attempted assassinations, arson, disinformation, troll farms, business allies, diplomacy, and so on to achieve that aim. That is the world that we live in, a world where there are many, many different types of actor that have to be unified for a greater aim. So can we activate a democratic network to compete with this criminal network that Russia uses? So, somewhere where we're learning a lot about this is the mission to subvert Russian military supply chains. Yeah. When we started working on this at the start of the war, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of sanctions being thrown around with not a lot of logic, a lot of chasing, things like microtrips, which are almost impossible to stop in their sort of transport to Russia. There's just so many of them. So there are all these sort of inefficient and haphazard attempts to deal with this challenge. But over 3 years, democratic allies have got a lot better at it. They've got a lot better at uniting different tools in different sectors. Firstly, they focused on the parts of the Russian military supply chains that are the most important and the most vulnerable. Things like CNC machines. These are complex machines which create the weapons that are used on the front lines, or focusing on howitzers, which make a huge difference on the front. And what we've seen over the last few years has been completely remarkable and I think unprecedented. We have independent researchers in Kiev and in London. Look at the work of the Open Source Center, for example, who scour custom records and other open source data to map the vulnerabilities in the Russian military supply chains, the origin of spare parts, the raw materials, the mining equipment. So you create that mapping through open source research, yeah, and then you think, okay, what of this is vulnerable to disruption? So you have the open source researchers working with anti-corruption campaigners. You can put pressure on companies. You have them working with business, who are themselves actually very interested in increasing export controls to limit how their supplies reach Russia. You can work with states for more surgical sanctions. You can work with other sort of countries that can take more direct action. I give this as an example about how we can start putting together a unity of open source researchers, anti-corruption campaigners, journalists, government officials, businesses, for a greater aim, a strategic aim of subversing Russian military supply chains. We haven't applied this sort of logic at the moment to, shall we say, Russian election interference. We're constantly running around trying to catch a piece of disinformation, which is noble and right and worthy, but it's not strategic. It's a bit like trying to stop every microchip from reaching Russian military supply chains. If we were to do this in a thought-out way, we would map the Russian disinformation ecology. We would think about what are the legal mechanisms that can be used to stop illegal covert finance. We would think about how do we work with tech companies so that they enforce their own terms of service against activity which is against that. And we would think of the key audiences that we need to reach, that the Russians are reaching in their various attempts at election interference. So as we think about lessons, I think we can learn also a lot, not just from our adversaries, but also from the front line states, the ones who are at the very forefront in this battle. So let's take the example of Moldova. Yeah, over last year, during the Moldovan elections and referendum about its future EU commitments, Russia launched a sort of an unprecedented scale of hybrid interventions. There was a massive vote buying schemes that, in effect, reached 10% of voters. There were cyber attacks on Moldovan institutions. Gas supplies were cut off. There were military threats were made. And there was obviously a wave of disinformation and propaganda, often smearing the EU, saying that EU membership would undermine Moldovan families and so on. The Moldovans did, I think, something really quite remarkable. You had Moldovan investigative reporters from Zirul de Guardia who managed to uncover the vote-buying scheme, that was emanating from Moscow before the vote. You had police also exposing this very, very, very pernicious and deeply illegal operation. They did that before the vote took place, which allowed the public to make sense of it and react to it. I mean, contrast that with the bad example we had in the US in 2016, when the Obama administration knew about Russian intervention, didn't say anything, or the problems we've had in Romania, where it was only after the election that the authorities began to talk about Russian intervention. This has to happen before. And we see both journalists and the police focusing in on this issue. That's great. It can be improved upon. Yeah, if we look at Moldova going forward, in an ideal world, we would have not just journalists involved, we would have the police in Moldova working with police across the European Union to subvert and reveal corrupt networks that are involved in issues like vote buying schemes well before the elections, not in the weeks before, but in the months and maybe years before. We would have dedicated teams researching disinformation campaigns and informing the tech companies about where we see various behavior that goes against their terms of service. And you would have strategic communications campaigns that would reach the audiences that are most targeted by the various untruths being told by Russia. Nothing to do with censorship, just a case of reaching those audiences in a targeted way. So that's what we can learn from our adversary. That's what we can start to learn from frontline states. And finally, I think we need to learn from the past. We have faced challenges like this before, and we have responded. In the Second World War, the British created the Political Warfare Executive in order to subvert Nazi propaganda. Or in the Cold War, there was the US Information Agency that had very, very high authority to respond to and to deal with Soviet propaganda and active measures. What does that teach us? That teaches us that you do need a central coordinated mechanism that is making sense of these threats and that is dictating our policy towards them. And the other thing we can learn from the past is that, of course, you need to also respond to the pressure points of the enemy. In the Second World War, the British conducted many communications exercises towards German soldiers into the heartland of Germany. In the Cold War, the USIA looked after, for example, Radio Free Europe that transmitted issues to do with national rights and human rights and free culture into the Soviet Union. Today, again, the strongest form of deterrence for our adversaries will be is if they can see that we are prepared to put pressure in their backyard. The only way towards peace is if they feel that they are in a position of vulnerability and have to take us seriously. In that sense, offense is the only path towards stability and peace. I think we have a very, very urgent issue coming around the corner. Radio Free Europe, which still exists, is probably being defunded by America. An excellent opportunity for Europe to step up and to improve our communication into Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your recipes and describing with a lot of precision everything that is being destroyed right now by the US administration. The next panelist is Dr. Magnus Hjort. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you, Peter, for your very good remarks. I would say something about the Psychological Defense Agency and what we do, and try to keep within the time limits. We were established, as was said, 3 years ago, and we are a civil defense agency under the Swedish government, organized under the Ministry of Defense. So we are a defense agency. We only look at antagonistic threats coming from abroad, from outside Sweden. We are around 80 at the moment, and when we were doing the inquiry in order to set the agency up a few years ago, I thought it necessary to decide why do we need a psychological defense. And we came up with the formula: the purpose of psychological defense is to safeguard the open and democratic society, the free formation of opinion, and Sweden's freedom and independence. And as was being said also, this builds on older concepts. We established the psychological defense back in the 1950s, and we had the roots from World War II. We had a psychological defense to counter psychological warfare and create resilience within the population. Today, we define psychological defense as the collective ability of society to resist foreign malign information influence activities directed at Sweden. And in war, psychological defense aims to prevent an adversary from breaking down our resistance and our will to defend through disinformation, propaganda, and psychological warfare. And of course, we could be described as a counter-FEMI agency, an anti-FEMI agency. I won't have to delve into what FEMI is, you know all about that. We have three major remits from the Swedish government, and one is to build long-term resilience within the whole of the Swedish society. So we should contribute to strengthening the population's resilience. We disseminate knowledge and contribute to the population's and relevant actors' preparedness in terms of psychological defense. We fund research, we have training exercises and courses, we do lectures, and we publish a report series. As of somewhat 2 years ago, we initiated a psychological defense research institute at Lund University, and we regularly publish research such as this one on malign foreign interference within the gaming world, which I think is something that is understudied. We need more research in how foreign adversaries are using the gaming domain in order to influence our societies. We also publish handbooks such as this one, aiming for reporters, journalists, and all our work you should be able to find it at our website in English as well as Swedish. So I mentioned education and training courses. We provide a basic course, an application course, an advanced course, as well as other training courses. Our target groups are communicators, preparedness and security coordinators at local, regional and central level, as well as actors within civil society. We also provide a course on FEMI for the intelligence community in Sweden. Cooperation with civil society is of utmost importance, I think, so we have created what we call Youth Resilience Hub, which is a network platform for cooperation with various youth organizations in Sweden. And the aim, of course, is to create conditions for a long-term and trusting relationship between the Psychological Defense Agency and young civil society. We also try to support other ambitious enterprises, such as supporting information for the elderly. We have supported a couple of films. One is called Think for Yourself. It's an educational film for senior citizens regarding election interference. And we also did one, or supported one, aimed at informing elderly citizens about how social media is actually functioning with algorithms, etc. We also have collaboration with networks and NGOs in socioeconomically vulnerable areas that we have been doing for a few years now. One is called Järvaveckan in Swedish. We also, from time to time, we publish a broad campaign aimed at the Swedish general public. It's called Don't Get Fooled. And here we have information in Swedish, English and Arabic. Media literacy is of course very important, and in cooperation with the Fojo Media Institute at Linnaeus University, we offer free training sessions for professional journalists on how to identify and tackle information influence activities. And we're also part of the national effort to strengthen media literacy in Sweden. That network is called Media Literacy Sweden, MIL Sweden. It's a network of 24 authorities and civil society organizations. It's coordinated by the Swedish Authority for the Media. Of course, we have operational activities. We identify, analyze, and we are able to provide support in dealing with FEMI activities directed against Sweden or Swedish interests. We report regularly to the Swedish government and government offices and other relevant actors when needed. A third remit from the Swedish government is to prepare Swedish psychological defense for war. And of course we are setting up a wartime organization, and we have an additional assignment from the Swedish government. In the event of war or danger of war, the agency must be able to support the government and propose measures that aim to reduce the potential attacker's ability and intention to attack. And of course, this is only in the event of war or danger of war, but this must be prepared and analyzed before we are in a wartime situation if we are to be able to do something. We also have a cooperation council for psychological defense where we cooperate specifically with the Swedish Armed Forces, the Swedish Security Service, the Civil Contingencies Agency, the Counter-Administrative Boards, the Swedish Agency for the Media and Swedish Institute. And we have also the ability to quickly bring in other agencies or stakeholders that are being subjected to some kind of FEMI attack from, any kind of foreign entities. International cooperation is, of course, super important, and we second staff to NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence in Riga, the EEAS Stratcom, where we have 2 secondments at the time, the Swedish Embassy in Tallinn, there we have 1 secondment, and also in the NATO headquarters in Brussels. And we have extensive bilateral cooperation with a number of countries. And I could mention specifically France and Visionum. We have people in Paris today and tomorrow to work together with Visionum in trying to improve our specific mandates from our respective governments. Trying to learn from each other's best experiences and how we deal with the FEMI threat. Ukraine is of special interest for us. We have a remit from the Swedish government to support Ukraine, and this is something we have been doing for a number of years now. And this is also very important for us because we learn how the information war is fought in a real war. And we learn a lot what is working and what is not working when it comes to countering Russia. Moldova was being mentioned by Peter Pomerantsev, and we have been supporting Moldova within the EU mission there. And we will be back in Moldova. I think we are back in Moldova right now. We are trying to find different ways in supporting Moldova, but also learn from Moldova's experience on their, how they were subjected to Russian FEMI activities. I see I've overstretched my time limit a bit. A few concluding remarks. We need to work with the whole society. We need to work with civil society. We need to work together in Europe and together with other like-minded countries. We need to do things together. We need to learn from each other's experiences. We need to see how we can improve our response mechanisms towards FEMI activities. And we need to evaluate the things we do. How do we know that we are being effective? How do we know that we are effectively countering FEMI activities? And that is something that we are trying to look at all the time. Besides that, we are always trying to improve our own work, both in the operational side of things, but also in the long-term resilience building activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now the floor goes to Mr. Pisalo.
Madam Chair, honorable members of the European Parliament, thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure and honor to address the special committee today. The European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats is an international organization based in Helsinki, Finland. All EU and NATO member states are participants of the centre, and the EU is our very close stakeholder. In the recent years, hybrid threats have dominated the security landscape in Europe. As we heard in the first panel discussion, Russia has recently escalated its threats to our shared values and democratic institutions in many ways. As already pointed out by the Honourable Chair, their aim is typically to undermine our democratic values and institutions, as well as our support to Ukraine. My organization, Hybrid COE, is focused on research and analysis as well as supporting our participating states, the EU and NATO, on countering all types of hybrid threats from state and non-state actors alike. One of the key threats from Russia has recently been hostile information operations towards the EU and its member states. As we heard from the previous experts, Russia has continuously escalated its information operations towards Europe, including by using artificial intelligence in many new ways, making its disinformation operations more efficient and more effective. Russia's key narratives focus on dividing our populations, dividing the EU and NATO unity, and sowing discontent between us and our international partners. Considering the focus of the Special Committee on Malicious Interference in Democratic Processes, I will mostly focus on countering disinformation and cognitive intrusion in my statement. In our point of view, a strong response to hybrid threats requires good and joint situational awareness, robust countermeasures, strong resilience, and also deterrence created by a combination of denial and punishment. All of this certainly also applies to countering disinformation. My Czech colleague Jakub Kalinsky, with a background in EU vs Disinfo, has introduced a model called 4 Lines of Defense for countering hostile information operations. It provides a good outline on how to build situational awareness, countermeasures, resilience, and deterrence in the information space. I'll briefly introduce it and happy to elaborate in the discussion. The first line of defense is detection, first reaction, and documentation. And this is mainly to build situational awareness. It requires a good understanding of the media environment by mapping and documentation of the threat. We should continuously be able to understand the extent of the threat, the main actors, their objectives and tactics, as well as the key narratives used and their impact on our societies. As a first reaction, we should be able to fact-check and debunk disinformation and write our own narratives with our strategic communications. This is predominantly a national responsibility, but coordination and cooperation across the EU would certainly support maintaining joint situational awareness. Not many countries have solid procedures in place for this, and it certainly does take a lot of resources. But I'm actually glad to be in the same panel with Magnus, because the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency is one of the best practices in this field, besides Viginum in France that he also pointed out to. The first line of defense, so this building of situational awareness, if you may, is a prerequisite for all of the following lines of defense. It's impossible to counter disinformation operations without good situational awareness. So then moving on, the second line of defense is raising awareness to ensure that more people are aware and attentive to the threat. Basically, our whole populations are targeted, so we should also make them aware of the threat. We need to reach out to our populations in all the channels they predominantly use, and this varies significantly across demographics and countries. And Magnus also pointed out to a Swedish public awareness campaign. Many countries are doing similar campaigns, and it really does take a big effort to reach out to the whole population. Fact-checking, debunking, strategic communication that I already mentioned, they also support raising awareness. And here, EU vs Disinfo is actually a good effort at the EU level. Besides that, attribution is also helpful for raising public awareness. And the European Parliament resolution from January this year is actually a good example on how this should be done at the EU level. There has recently also been a strong focus on media literacy education, which certainly contributes to raising awareness as well. And here it's really important to target the youth before they engage in the media environment. The third line of defense is repairing, mitigating, and preventing weaknesses in the information system. And this refers not only to how we should repair weaknesses in social media, but also in traditional media and other information channels. But definitely stronger regulation of social media would be an important step in this direction. And here the EU Digital Services Act is a good effort to repair weaknesses in social media But of course, it's only focused on one part of the information space, social media and the big companies. We should also make sure that we focus on traditional media by ensuring availability of independent and diverse free media. And also building societal trust in public institutions would support the impact and effect of strategic communications. Finally, the fourth line of defense is limiting, punishing, and deterring aggressors. And this is the only line of defense directed at the aggressor and aiming to actually stop it. Many national and EU tools, including diplomatic, political, and economic ones, can be applied. Some member states have also decided to close Russian state media and media affiliated somehow with Russia. Closing funding of disinformation actors would also have a significant impact. Funding of the Russian disinformation effort is manifold in comparison with our response, and closing that funding would be very effective. Finally, the EU has an abundance of tools to counter hybrid threats, including disinformation in its comprehensive hybrid toolbox. We should ensure EU unity in order to be able to apply these tools in a comprehensive and coherent manner across all EU institutions. But besides unity, more resources are needed in order to respond to the enormous volume of disinformation and cognitive intrusion. EU efforts should also be aligned with the EU Preparedness Union strategy, which supports foresight, preparedness, resilience, and response in a whole-of-society approach. This is also really important at the EU level, the whole-of-society approach. Besides EU institutions' efforts, EU-NATO cooperation is also key in order to align all efforts using their complementary competences. This should include, for example, synchronized countermeasures using EU hybrid toolbox and NATO hybrid responses. It should combine NATO's deterrence, preparedness, and countermeasures with EU's resilience building, sanctions, and other economic and financial tools. And finally, also strategic communications should be coordinated and aligned, including statements and communiques. This concludes my introduction, and happy to address in Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you to our guest speakers. There will be only one round of questions from our colleagues, and we'll start with the coordinators or the representatives for 2 minutes each. EPP, Lena Dupont.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to the panelists for their insights and the fruitful contribution to our debate here. And I'd like to pick up some of Sandra's words actually from the previous panel, highlighting that indeed we had in the previous term already an extensive work being done around FIMI specifically, but also around hybrid threats already starting there. But what changed in the meantime is, of course, the scale and intensity of the attacks we're seeing. So we need to live up as fast as we can also to that, not only with the implementation of the previous reports, but going further even in our approach in order to create resilience. So I'm specifically happy that also the preparedness strategy was mentioned, because I call it like the new trinity at European level, so the defense white paper, the internal security strategy, and the preparedness strategy, which aim all three at creating a new European security architecture, so to say. So it is indeed a cynical but needed moment for us to reflect on how to build that up in an efficient and pragmatic way, which would be my first question, basically, because we need to find structures that are flexible in order to react to hybrid threats, because the very aim of hybrid threat is that they're changing. In the meantime, you find an answer to them, but at the same time are as steadfast and fast as possible. So question to all three, what kind of structures would you advise us to invent here, with one of the core principles at the very beginning, the information exchange between various actors at member states level, but also at NATO level. And second to that, of course, the question on how to go forward with EU-NATO cooperation, also when you look at civil-military cooperation, for example, in order to create a functioning system. And the last question to that is probably because besides information exchange, at the one hand, it all starts with risk awareness of society. And I think there we all acknowledge that we do have a specific risk awareness in some member countries, but not specifically in all, and how we can go forward with that. Thanks.
For the S&Ds, Juan Fernando López Aguilar.
Thank you so much, both panelists. It's been most interesting to the purpose of this special committee of us. I would raise the following questions. First, after having heard from Magnus Hurt about this so-called psychological defense, just a word to elaborate if there's any assessment of what kind of tools have proven to be more effective than others. But I will dwell on the presentation that was made by Peter Pomerantsev. It was really interesting. To my knowledge, this is the very first time in which we have been actually called, it's been called to our attention that we could actually somehow retaliate by playing the same disinformation tools. And the example was set as to the experience of Second World War, in which, of course, there was disinformation against Germans again, and then through the Cold War against Soviet Union by then. But the point is that it's been the first time in which we have been actually called to somehow retaliate or play back or somehow fight back, strike back when it comes to disinforming ourselves too. But having said this, I would like you to elaborate on the matter. I would also raise an issue, and it is, according to your assessment and to your lessons learned, the way you put it, could it be the case that at a certain point of time, disinformation gets solid so that the outcome of disinformation cannot be challenged any longer? For instance, can it be the case that many in the US, many in the West, many in the European Union actually do tend to think that, after all, Putin had a point, that after all, Putin was protecting Russian-speaking minorities somewhere else, or after all, Russia was provoked by this enlargement of NATO, or after all, actually, Putin had a point, that there was something right about the offensive and the aggression that he took on Ukraine. What would your assessment as to this disinformation getting solid within the West? Thank you.
For the Patriots, Fabrice Légéry.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The experts have given us the benefit of their knowledge. I appreciate that, about Russia's undermining democracy in Europe. I think it's absolutely important that we cover all the angles in attempting to protect our democracy. So I'd like to know if there are other actors, state actors or non-state actors, who are using methods similar to those in Russia, or, on the contrary, using methods or tools which are completely different. And here I'm thinking of Azerbaijan, which, strangely, has been called a reliable partner by Mrs. von der Leyen. Thinking of China as well, which seems to be something that the Commission is very pleased with. The Gulf countries who've been shown to have corrupted this parliament, and I'm thinking of private actors as well. Various nebulous entities where it's difficult to know who is at the top of the chain of command, but where various ideologies are being spread within the EU institutions themselves via those routes. Can we take the experience of the experts we've heard today, the way in which Russia is trying to attack us and how we're trying to defend ourselves against Russia, and whether these methods and their experience could help us to increase our awareness raising against other threats which perhaps are underestimated at the moment, or where our committee on the European Democracy Shield could actually enhance its understanding of what's going on when it comes to all forms of interference, internally, externally, direct or indirectly, that can be threatening our democracies at national level or within the EU institutions. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. As I said, this is meant to be about Russia. We will have an occasion on another time, another meeting in this committee talking about other threats coming from other parts of the world.
That I see. So I give the floor to Renew and Helmut Brandstätter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the three of you. I want to start with Peter Pomarintsev, I'm very happy to be an alumni of Johns Hopkins, Bologna. And so my first question is about American universities, because it's part of authoritarian regimes to destroy science and universities. How is it in your university? And the next question, of course, you talked about Radio Free Europe. I would be interested. You think Trump will give any money for that or not? But the next question is, I mean, radio is good, television is good, but most people inform themselves online. Do you see any chance to build a radio online or an online Europe in order to get information to Russia? And did anybody think about that? And do you think that's possible? And then talking about Magnus Raw, talking about psychological warfare, there were a lot of terror attacks before the German elections, and there was a rumor that they were part of them. It probably also were organized by Russians. Do you have any intelligence on that? And last point, Mr. Pisalo, you talked about mapping the threats and the awareness. Obviously, there's no awareness at all that on X and other platforms there are lots of bots. What is your idea on bots? Just find them out, erase them, or what else could you do? And then we talked about these organizations, obviously funded by Russians. And one of them is Voice of Europe. And I'm sorry that Mr. Piston is not here anymore. But one of you, the three of you, you have any information? Does Voice of Europe still exist? Do they still finance European politicians? Do you know anything about that? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Then for ESN, Christine Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Oh boy. I've been hearing everything we need to do now to protect our citizens from Russian disinformation and the hybrid warfare. And you're coming up with all kinds of measures and steps of targeting audiences and strengthening resilience and all of these proposals. I think the problem we're having is a completely different one. We have lost every single shred of credibility with our citizens, and for very good reasons. They no longer trust us. We can say whatever we want, they will consider it to be a lie. And why do they? Very simple, because we have been lying to them for years and years and years. Just take the COVID messaging, for instance. It was told, yeah, I know it's funny. So we were told the mRNA injections had no side effects. We were told it would prevent infection and transmission. Well, it was a lie. And this lie has been told by the EU Commission and by every single government in every single member state of the EU. Then take the US presidential elections of 2020. There was talk about a Hunter Biden laptop, which everyone was totally certain and absolutely sure that was Russian disinformation. It was taken down. All reports were blocked. There were members of the intelligence services coming out swearing that it was Russian disinformation. And then what? Turned out it was a lie. It wasn't Russian disinformation. The Hunter Biden laptop, this filthy piece of crap, actually did exist, and it was his laptop. So why should the people even believe you anymore? So my question to all of the panelists is, what do you suggest, what measures, what steps would you take or should you take to restore lost confidence before you come up with any other plans to manipulate and gaslight your own citizens? Thank you.
I don't think anyone here, or I hope no one here, wants to manipulate or gaslight citizens. So sorry to correct something shocking that I just heard. And finally, our CD Chair, my Agnes Strack-Zimmermann.
Herzlichen Dank, Chair, und vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Yes, this again has been very interesting. I do have a question, whoever wants to answer it. It's about a lack of information or information deficit, if you like. We know that people don't read several newspapers and watch several news channels, especially if they're younger. They get a lot of their information from influencers, whoever they are, or from TikTok, where information is just reduced to bite-sized portions, and that cannot be nuanced enough to help our cause. So I'd like to put a question, because I think basically a lot of people are worried about how young people and other people as well can get their hands on serious information, trustworthy information. Obviously, newspapers and other media outlets need to earn money to pay their journalists, but that doesn't change things. There are only two things that are free: Russia Today and social networks. Russia Today you can get free of charge anywhere. So there has been an exchange between various media companies and how this should be done. But wherever you go, whatever you do, there are always paywalls. So if there's something that's interesting, then the consumers or readers have to pay for the paywall, buy a subscription or whatever, and so they tend not to go that far, even if some of the information might be free of charge, so that people can at least get a degree of a varied aspect to the news. Thank you.
Thank you. And before giving the floor back to our guest speakers, I would have two questions myself. The first one, reacting to the assertion that attribution is a positive answer to interferences. Are we certain that some countries don't pride themselves for getting attribution, as if they were getting awards for successful interferences? Are we certain it's efficient to attribute interferences to this or that country, including Russia? Because there have been many examples of attribution of campaigns to Russia. It never deterred Russia to do some new campaigns again. And on the blocking of Russia TV channels, we have a European company, Eutelsat, which finally, after long judiciary processes, blocked some Russian TV channels, but others are still available in Europe, including some of the most outrageous ones. I'm thinking of Volodymyr Solovyev's program. So I would like to understand how come that when there are sanctions in the European Union, they are not necessarily automatically implemented. Having asked my own questions, I will go back to our guest speakers, starting with Peter Pomerantsev.
Hi, thank you so much for this fantastic round of questions. I think I need to address the activity into Russia. So just to be clear, I am certainly not suggesting we pursue any kind of disinformation campaigns into Russia. I'm not entirely sure why anybody thought I said that. Radio Free Europe, for those who don't know, was a voice of truth into Russia in the Cold War and continues to be today. The political warfare in England supported the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC's work into Germany and occupied Europe. Their strength came from their accuracy, but it was the accuracy that mattered to people. Yeah. So, for example, Radio Free Europe had a great stress on national rights, which were a great vulnerability of the Soviet Union. There were, they gave a voice to people who supported an independent Ukraine, an independent Estonia, an independent Latvia, an independent Slovakia. Many of the countries here will know this history. So when we talk about communication into Russia, it is certainly not about disinformation. We do not need to choose the same methods as they do. But it is about thinking which audiences matter. So I think it is a no-brainer that we should be doing a mass media, and all media is multimedia today. Everything has to be in audio, in radio, in telegram. Every effective media is multimedia. But one aimed at Russian soldiers. Our aim is to have Russia stop its belligerent foreign policy and its war. Of course, there should be media addressed to its soldiers to convince them to try and convince them to take less active role in the war. That's just an obvious thing to do. It's not enough just to make, I don't know, media for the liberal exiles. That's very, very nice. That's very important for the future. But it's the soldiers, the potential recruits that we should be addressing a media towards. That will slow down mobilization. That'll make the war mongering less effective. And that will encourage Russia to change its calculation around its belligerent foreign policy. I think that was the main question that I was asked to address. But something I do notice keeps on coming up in this hearing, which is the relationship with the tech platforms and trust. So there's actually a very, very good set of proposals that were coming both from the right in the US and from what's known in America as the left, but also among some of the more insightful pieces of the DSA, which is really a call for radical transparency. We as citizens should understand, at the very least, it's a baseline freedom of expression demand to understand why tech companies uprank some content, downrank other content. What, when we see something online, what is a coordinated and authentic campaign from Russia or from another actor? That kind of radical transparency is what we need to restore trust in the digital sphere. It's completely politically agnostic. It doesn't matter if the actor is Russia or another one, but that is definitely the way to go. And I really hope that the DSA takes the lead in this sort of regulation, which is all about more freedom of expression. We should remember freedom of expression is the right to receive information as well. And I really hope that everybody in this room and also everybody in the US can agree that that is a baseline, non-partisan demand that will restore a degree of trust because it'll make our information landscape so much more transparent and clear and answerable to its citizens.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Dr. Hjort.
Thank you so much for the very interesting questions that were being put to us all. I'd like to start with the first question about what kind of structures are we looking for to improve Europe's FEMI capabilities, counter-FEMI capabilities. And I often think that we are kind of alone having an agency or our kind. We have Visionym in France. We have no other counterparts really of the same kind, which makes it a bit difficult to establish cooperation sometimes. Bear in mind, we're not a law enforcement agency, we're not security service, we're not military intelligence, we work only open source, which means that we can work so much more openly in the whole of society, working together with civil society to build resilience. So I would encourage member states to consider establishing agencies of our kind in some way. Another question was what kind of tools have been effective, and that is kind of the million-euro questions. How to measure effectiveness when it comes to counter-FEMI activities. It's very difficult. We will try to enhance our performances here, of course, because I think it's so important that we learn what is working, what is not working. We are currently looking into the Ukrainian experience, of course. When it comes to Sweden, I can say that we have, I think, a lot more awareness of the FEMI threat than we had a few years back. We have a lot of open debate about these questions, and I don't know, we have to look at our vulnerabilities, we have to reduce them, and that is something that I think is minimizing vulnerabilities is something that we all must look into. And to do that, we need to know our respective vulnerabilities. What are the issues that, for instance, Russia would be targeting? What are the things that worry our citizens? And they will target different things in different countries. Sweden is not a top priority right now for Russia. Other countries are more vulnerable, perhaps more important to attack. And so minimizing vulnerabilities, analyzing vulnerabilities and trying to come to terms with them, I think it's something that we need to do. But also, of course, look into our response mechanisms. And as Peter Pomerantsev said, we are not encouraging anyone to perform disinformation towards Russia. We need to work with truth and transparency all along our work, I think. Mr. Legeri asked a question about other actors using the same methods as Russia. And of course, Russia has been pioneering this for over 100 years, more than 100 years. They have been refining the tools that you can use. Different methods apply to different times because of technology, etc., and vulnerabilities they're trying to exploit. But of course, China has copied a lot of Russian methods. Iran, of course. And in Sweden, we have been particularly targeted by Islamist influence activities from Middle East, targeting our social services. So those are some of the adversaries that we are looking into and trying to see what they are doing towards us and how to counter it. There was a question about terror attacks and rumors about foreign actors behind them. This is something that we are not, this is outside our mandate really to look in. We're not a security service, we're not law enforcement or intelligence agency. So I have no further information on that. And of course, trust has been mentioned a few times here, and I think it's absolutely crucial that we establish trust within our institutions. Trust in agencies, trust in the work that we do. And the way forward is, of course, transparency in every way and upholding our democratic values as much as we can. We cannot fight Russia by becoming like Russia. We need to uphold our democratic values all the time to build trust. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Pisalo.
Madam Chair, dear members of Parliament, thank you so much for the great questions. Let me try to address at least a few of them, given the time. First of all, a member of Parliament Dupont, great to see you again. You had great questions about EU-NATO coordination, about structures. I feel like, especially in EU-NATO coordination, it's not so much about new structures than better coordination. In EU-NATO coordination, I would definitely recommend strengthening this staff-to-staff coordination and cooperation, especially the thematic cooperation. But I think, given the good momentum in EU-NATO cooperation, I think we should also see if we could find a way to have stronger political cooperation as well, including, for example, the North Atlantic Council and PSC joint meetings that used to take place years back. And again, on those coordination structures, I'm not sure if it's so much about building new structures or permanent structures. They can also be ad hoc structures. But one critical element is definitely sharing information and sharing intelligence. And that seems to be very difficult, even between EU member states, but especially between EU and NATO. I think we should find a way to do that in order to build that joint situational awareness, which is so important at this stage. Let me also address the chair's remarks on attribution, whether it's always effective. I feel like it does definitely vary country by country based on the level of awareness of the population. In some countries, it might actually intimidate the population more than raise awareness or build resilience. But I feel like especially these joint attributions by the European Parliament, by other EU institutions, even joint EU-NATO declarations and attributions do have an impact, because the credibility is very high when partners come together to attribute some specific cases. I did also want to refer to the question on trust from Member of Parliament Anderson. I think building trust is a very long-term question, but definitely strengthening democratic institutions, ensuring efficient separation of powers, having credible oversight mechanisms in place, and also supporting independent media would have an impact on restoring some of that trust. But definitely quite a difficult question and a very long-term objective. But nevertheless, very important as well. I feel like in order for government communications, strategic communications to have an impact, the trust has to be there. And we should definitely do our best to increase it. I also did want to mention on the other countries, hybrid COE is very much focused on other actors as well, including many of the ones mentioned. But considering this session is focused on Russia, we'll certainly be happy to look at other countries in the next session if we are invited. And finally, yes, maybe just to address Member of Parliament Lopez Aguilar's question also on whether there is actually sort of traction for the Russian disinformation in the West. I'm not sure if it's so much a question of whether our populations believe in all that disinformation. It's more a question of sort of that sort of subtle shaping of opinions, which is not necessarily disinformation. It can be just sort of trying to have an impact on our thinking about our political beliefs, on our voting, and so on, which is really dangerous. I mean, some of this disinformation is so uncredible that it doesn't have a lot of traction. But certainly this sort of cognitive intrusion, this very subtle messaging that actually shapes the opinion of our public, that really is dangerous for our population. And finally, Member of Parliament Brandstetter had a specific question on what to do about bots. I do think the Digital Services Act sort of provides an opportunity and a regulation that could be used to address those bot networks. It should be definitely utilized more efficiently. It's all about implementation. So I think if we build on the Digital Services Act, if we use it as actively and as strongly as possible, I think that could be one solution. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to our guest speakers for their excellent contributions to our debates. I would like to conclude by stressing a few points that you raised. The first, as you all mentioned, every time we have guest speakers, you all ask us, please enforce the DSA. Please enforce the regulations and the legislations you already have. This message, we have to send it again to the European Commission and certainly not backtrack and backpedal at a moment where there could be pressure from across the Atlantic to abandon or dismantle our regulations. The second message is that we are under attack by Russia. It's not a reason to use Russian methods. We are democracies. We are strong as we are. I heard that there was no trust whatsoever in the European Union. Contrary to what I heard, there's never been that much support for the European Union project in opinion polls throughout Europe. There are expectations that we are able to do more and to do better and to do it democratically. We have to reach out to our audiences, but I also hear that we should reach out to Russian audiences as well. And finally, information manipulation might only be the tip of the iceberg. There are other Russian methods, other Russian attacks that are even more violent. So we need to build resilience. We need to stop dividing our societies and try to reconcile them. And we need to build on positive experiences like the Sweden Psychological Defense Agency or Viginum in France. We need more of them. There is room for improvement in member states and at the European level as well. So we'll try to work on it. Thank you everyone for this very intense and informative session.